Hey YouTube, it's Eric. I'm going to try to keep this video somewhat short. I'm just going to be covering how the Vatican and the Jesuits are openly endorsing the Chinese model of society. If you're not aware, I've been aware of Chinese imperialism for a while, but I've just started recently looking into just how bad it really is. If you've seen the show Black Mirror, in particular, Black Mirror is a show on Netflix that kind of it goes into like dystopian type of situations. But they had a show on social media, and they have it. Essentially, it's a social credit system, and they the way I can describe China's system is literally the system in that Black Mirror episode. In the social credit system in China, I linked a documentary in the description box that you should watch, but everything is digitized. Everything you do, so every single post you make on the internet is censored, and you get a score for everything you do. So basically, the more obedient you are to the Chinese government, the higher your social credit score, and you can get stuff like the way they're suckering people into this is like, oh, if you get a higher social credit score, you don't have to pay a down payment on your car, blah 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 blah. But everything I've seen is like no down payments is the way that they're suckering people into this. But basically, like it's a scary sight. It's like a dystopian, like communist. It's like a digitized version of the Jesuit Paraguayan reductions. That's actually what's going down in China. And I'm gonna show you like high-profile Vatican bishops are endorsing this model. Well, let me see here. Give me a second. My screen's not screen sharing. Oh, I'm having technical issues. Oh, the screen's sharing. Okay, give me a second. Am I in the right Wi-Fi here? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties there. This is the article I want to show you here. This is from the Catholic Herald. This is recent too, 2018. And up here, where I live in Canada, our Jesuit-trained puppet of a prime minister, Justin Trudeau, who literally, like, this is covered by the Globe and Mail. When Trudeau was elected in 2016, he sent the Jesuit Pope Francis like 3 books on the early Jesuit orders activities in Canada. Justin Trudeau went to the College of Jean Brebeuf, as well did Canada's Chief Justice Richard Wagner. But Trudeau, like every chance he gets, he's like promoting China as like a great society, and he literally like he's just type in like I typed it in here. Type in just Trudeau loves China. He literally says like in a question with Global News, he asked what country he admires most. Trudeau said China. Like he praises President Xi Jinping, who's literally like the emperor of China. Just like how Putin has turned into like the Tsar of Russia. Putin's going to be in power for another 6 years. So like, Putin just actually next year will be like Russia's longest reigning ruler since Jesuit trained Joseph Stalin. And Putin like kisses up to the Vatican every chance he gets. Also, but the Jesuit trained Trudeau loves China. I'm sure it's the same with Emmanuel Macron. Type in Emmanuel Macron, China. I'm sure he's propping up China every chance he gets. But look at this: the Catholic Herald, February 6, 2018. The headline is, quote, China is the best implementer of social Catholic doctrine, says Vatican bishop. And this is the video that I recommend you watch here. It's called Exposing China's Digital Dystopian Dictatorship. This is actually a pretty good video here. Like there's 170 million cameras in China. 170 million. And like these 170 million cameras are all programmed in with artificial intelligence. You'll see in this video that police officers in China wear like artificial intelligence glasses. It's crazy. This section here from like 7 minutes to 10 minutes is following this like Chinese couple who have like completely immersed their lives in like the digital world, and it's just kind of scary to see what's going on out there. Like the Chinese people are completely like been zombified. Like their internet is completely censored. Like there's no like you can't get onto a website that's not approved by the Chinese Communist Party. Like there's no outside information into China. It's like a firewall. So I recommend you check that out. But like it's the Vatican is literally endorsing China, this digital dictatorship, as the best Catholic social doctrine. and this was Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Serrano. Here's the quote from Bishop Marcelo Serrano. Right now, those who are best implementing the social doctrine of the church are the Chinese, a senior Vatican official has said. Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Serrano, Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, praised the communist state as, quote, extraordinary, saying, quote, you don't have shanty towns, you don't have drugs, young people don't take drugs, end quote. Instead, there is a, quote, positive national conscience, end quote. I think this is interesting too. This is actually, I'll bring this up. If you're not aware, the Knight of Malta, Eric Prince, who's the founder of the paramilitary crusading force Blackwater, which Blackwater committed like numerous war crimes in Iraq. Like the most famous one is the Nusir Square massacre, where Blackwater troops like shot like 15 innocent Iraqis for like no reason. Like Eric Prince, like I'm pretty in his memoirs, like he talks about how like he was like he viewed Muslims as like like scum. I'm paraphrasing. So like his sibling here, Betsy DeVos, the devout Catholic, is the Secretary of Education. But Eric Prince has called himself like a second coming of Wild Bill Donovan, the Knight of Malta, Knight of Saint Sylvester, head of the OSS. Who that Wild Bill Donovan was the main player in bringing all the Nazis here to over to the United States in Operation Paperclip. But Eric Prince's new company here, he's made a new company since Blackwater called Frontier Services Group, but it's one of the biggest companies in the world, and it's based in China. It's like the biggest like Chinese private company in the world. And this is true here. Interestingly, like the president of South Sudan is a Salva Kiir Mayardit is a devout Roman Catholic. And his trademark cowboy hat was given to him by President George W. Bush, who saw God in the eyes of Pope Benedict the 16th, which is interesting. The Frontier is one of the biggest private military firms in the world, and it's based in China. You just see, if you're not aware of that. I'm going to show you just some more interesting like Jesuit connections to China throughout this video. Yeah, like he's got like, serious connections in this company to the Chinese financial establishment, and like the Chinese imperialism is all over the world. Like China just built Venezuela's camera system. There's a Jesuit coup taking place in Venezuela. Like it's interesting because in Venezuela, the Jesuits control both sides. Like the current Black Pope Arturo Sosa is Venezuelan. Nicolas Maduro is a devout Catholic. Maduro is backed by Russia and China, which are those two countries are controlled by the Jesuits and the Vatican. And Juan Guaido is also a Catholic like Nicolas Maduro. And Juan Guaido was trained by the Jesuits at Andres Bello University in Venezuela, which was actually funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, which I disclosed in the preface I wrote for The Dollar in the Vatican by Ira Manhattan that Father Felix Morlian. I've actually found a source that claimed Morlian was a Jesuit, actually, because I wasn't aware. Felix Morlian was also very big in the film industry over in Italy and Belgium. But Father Felix Morlian of Pro Dio merged with the OSS into create in Pro Dio merging with OSS with the OSS that merge is essentially what brought together the CIA. The mixing of Vatican and American intelligence, and that's why the Catholic Herald will even tell you that like the CIA is known as Catholics in Action. But Felix Morlian had a program with Inter-American Bank, and I disclose a letter he sent to Grayton Upton and there's also a letter I disclosed from Grayton Upton to Walter Rostow, who was one of the advisors to Jesuit-trained Lyndon Johnson and his administration, one of his economic advisors. Walter Rostow coined the term nation building. But it was disclosed that like Father Felix Morlian was getting billions of dollars sent through the Inter-American Development Bank. And it's just interesting that the Inter-American Development Bank funded the school that Juan Guaido attended, and it's a Jesuit school, Andres Bello University. And if you look into it, the Inter-American Development Bank, I've recently archived this. Let's get a drink here. They in the dictatorship of Rios Montt in Guatemala in the 1980s. The Inter-American Development Bank funded a massive hydroelectric dam. I think it was called the Chexi Dam. If you type in Inter-American Development Bank Guatemala genocide, you'll see how they completely enabled Rios Montt. Like this hydroelectric dam was placed in the area of the country where all the prominent military establishment lived, and it greatly enriched them and impoverished the peasants. And that regime massacred 200,000 Indians. And Rios Montt was supported by the Knights of Malta, and especially the Billy Graham, the powerful Protestant sects in the United States, Billy Graham, Pat Robertson, and the likes of them. And interestingly, this Rios Montt's brother was a Catholic priest. But I got a little off topic there, but you see, China is building police states all over the world via their camera system. And they have 170 million cameras. All the cameras are integrated with facial recognition, and these are the systems that they're building everywhere. Interestingly, China's building Ecuador's camera system as well. And they're also building, I saw, Australia's cameras. So it's going to be in no time. If Justin Trudeau wins the next election, well, Andrew Scheer, who is running up against him, is a papist as well. But Canada will adopt the Chinese surveillance model very soon, I predict. But you see here, ABC even covered this: Chinese video surveillance used by the Australian government. Okay. Yeah, they're using Chinese CCTVs. Just going back here to the Australian government is very controlled by the Jesuits. I've done a video on that. Mainstream Australian sources have even commented on. It's kind of odd how many Jesuit-educated politicians are prominent in Australia. Just the last Jesuit-educated prime minister was Tony Abbott, and he was prime minister fairly recently. But you see, Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Serrano is chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. He praised the communist state as extraordinary. Okay, actually, so I read that above. Okay, continuing here. The bishop told the Spanish language edition of the Vatican Insider that in China, quote, the economy does not dominate politics as it happens in the United States, something Americans themselves would say. Yeah, because they keep you dumbed down to not even wanting to know, don't worry about economics. That's up to the state to decide. You can just be a good little peasant, go work your slave job, go play some dinky app on your phone, and just be go feed yourself and just be good, obedient serfs. That's the Chinese system. It's the Jesuit Paraguayan reduction system. But continuing, Bishop Sanchez Serrano said China was implementing Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. Actually, I haven't read this encyclical, but all these encyclicals are on the internet. The Vatican archives them. Yes, if you type. Yeah, so I'll link this in the show notes. Yeah, so this is Francis's recent encyclical. It's probably a communist encyclical. No doubt it is. And actually, I'll link this too. This is a post I read. I made up a year ago on this smart city. This is what essentially was going on in China. This digitization in China is in line with this quote unquote trend of we're going to build quote unquote smart cities. And the smart cities is a digitized city. But at this company, Gaia Smart Cities in India, I found the two guys that started this company, Vipin Kumar and Sumit Chowdhury, were both trained by the Jesuits, coincidentally. So I'll link this in the description also. So according to Bishop Sanchez Serrano, China is implementing Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si better than many other countries and praised it for defending the Paris Climate Accord. Quote, in that it is assuming a moral leadership that others have abandoned, end quote. And that's just hilarious. Everyone knows that China is a smog. It's there's no regulations in China on the environment. You can see people in China, I've seen footage, people wear masks, walking down the street. Hilarious. The accused U.S. President Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is trained by the Jesuits, but the bishop, if we get this guy's name here, Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Serrano accused U.S. President Donald Trump of being, quote, manipulated like global oil firms. I don't think so. The global oil, like Charles Koch gave Donald Trump like $5 million. All the Koch brothers, for instance, gave Trump money. Exxon, like Trump made a CEO of Exxon, Rex Tillerson, as Secretary of State. So I'm not buying that Trump's being manipulated by the global oil firms, but and said that as opposed to those who quote follow liberal thought, the Chinese are working for the greater good of the planet. And funny. The Vatican and China have been holding talks in recent years over the status of the quote underground church and the appointment of bishops. In November, the Vatican museums also organized joint exhibitions with China in what was called quote diplomacy of art end quote. As part of the diplomacy efforts, Bishop Sanchez Sarando visited the country. Quote, "What I found was an extraordinary China," end quote. He said, quote, "What people don't realize is that the central value in China is work, work, work." It's like this, like the Paraguayan reductions. There's no other way fundamentally. It's like St. Paul said, "He who doesn't work doesn't eat." Oh, that's a good way to link that to the Bible. Bishop Sanchez Sarando concluded by saying that China is, quote, developing well and now has, quote, many points of agreement with the Vatican. Quote, "You cannot think that China of today is the China of the time of John Paul or Cold War Russia," end quote, he said. I'm going to show you, like, the Vatican has been covertly manipulating China for quite some time. Here's an example of this. I found this guy here. His name was Lee Lindsay. He's known as hailed as China's Mahatma Gandhi. Look at that. Lee Lindsay here, he was a monitored Chinese educator, diplomat, and scholar. He was Chiang Kai-shek's like personal representative. You see here, he was and Chiang Kai-shek was like the Chinese linchpin of fascism. Like Smedley Butler said that when he was a U.S. Marine, he went over to China to fight alongside the Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese forces to make sure that Standard Oil's investments in China went unmolested. That was actually, that was a part of the Japanese invasion into China, was to protect Standard Oil property over there. But Chiang Kai-shek was a backer of fascism, like James Farley. I quoted an excerpt in the preface I did for the Dollar in the Vatican when James Farley, Knight of Malta, was the CEO of the Coca-Cola Export Corporation. He went to Chiang Kai-shek in China to bless his fascist regime. But Lee Lindsay was a key facilitator to the China-German relationships during the 1930s when the Nazis were coming into power, and a major proponent of China's League of Nations diplomacy. He was a co-founder of some of China's most influential organizations, including the China branch of the United Nations and China Institute of World Cultural Cooperation of the League of Nations. Being reputed as a human bridge connecting Chinese and European cultures, Lee made a great contribution to helping the West comprehend ancient Chinese philosophies and introduced many Western progressive thoughts to China. A descendant of Jiang Ziya, the Chinese legendary founding prime minister during the Zhou dynasty. Okay, I was gonna say I'll have to look into that. I don't necessarily believe that, but apparently Lee was the fourth great grandson of Li Yi, a leader of the Qing dynasty. Okay, but that all aside, where did Lee Lindsay go to school? The Mahatma Gandhi of China, who was also simultaneously quote to Adolf Hitler's regime. Oh, he went to the Jesuit University, Sophia University, a private Jesuit research institution in Japan. Would you look at that? Okay. You see, he was a diplomatic consultant to Chiang Kai-shek. And he was been in the Chinese branch of the founding of the United Nations. And this is key because supposedly the Vatican was like against China joining the United Nations. And you see covertly they weren't. The Chinese representative right when they were initially joining the United Nations in the 40s was Lee Lindsay, Jesuit trained at Sophia University. You see, they've been covertly controlling China, and I recommend you go through this article here. This was done here on People China, Rediscovering a Chinese Legend. This was done in 2017. But just from doing some, I'm not going to do it just right now because I don't want the video to go on too long. But just doing some digging, I found that this Lee Lindsay was close to like the fascists and Mussolini's regime. He was close to the fascists and Franco's regime. He was close to the Nazis. This covers how he went to Sophia University. Talks about his role in the United Nations. And you see right here, he was China's Mahatma Gandhi. You can't make this up. And currently, just quickly, where was this here? The current United States. So the United States, or the Vatican, through their proxy, the United States is also they're having this trade war against China right now, supposedly. But Terry Branstad, the United States ambassador to China, you see right here, is a Knight of Columbus and a Scottish Rite Freemason. I have this documented in a blog post where I talk about how the motto of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry is identical to the motto of the Jesuits, Ad Mortium Al Gloriam. But that's even, I'm pretty sure that both of those documentations are even on his Wikipedia page. But the current U.S. ambassador to China is a Knight of Columbus and a Scottish Rite Freemason, Terry Branstad, which is interesting. Where was this here? Give me a second. Actually, and what this Jesuit digital dictatorship is I linked this. I've talked about this before. This was a book that was written in 1604 by Johann Valentin André, who, through my research, I've discovered to have been a pseudonym of Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon wrote his book, The New Atlantis, which immediately just resonated to me. That could be like a Jesuit utopian text. Like The New Atlantis was even written in Spanish, which I thought was odd for Francis Bacon, an Englishman, to write his New Atlantis in Spanish, knowing also that all the early Jesuits were Spanish. I think that makes more sense. But look what Sir Francis Bacon put here on this book here, writing as André, titled Mythologiae Christianity. Here, see IHS. That's the Jesuit logo right there with the sunburst coming out of it. And you see at the top right pillars, you have Theologica and Politica. That's how the Jesuits rule the world today, through religion and politics. You see they have history, mathematics underneath, Grammatica. Grammatica is crazy because there's a tongue in this hand that's being snatched out of another person's hand, which I think is symbolic of the Jesuits creating this legal fiction system of law, whereby all people are corporations and corporations are people. You see the Freemasonic square and compass is even on this, which is interesting. Bacon, or via André, had many connections to the Rosicrucian order as well. And I did a blog post on this that you can find that's titled Sir Francis Bacon was known as Valentin André on a pseudonym. Right here. It's a long title, but that's it. You can find this post here. But this was the original. This is the book that Bacon wrote, and you have to keep in mind this book was written right before the Paraguayan reductions went up, and the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. They created the modern communist model. Karl Marx was then tutored by the Jesuits for 5 years in Trier. Fidel Castro went to 3 Jesuit schools. There's a great article on the Irish Times on Fidel Castro, communist Hall of Famer Fidel Castro. Actually, and I'll read you. I was reading I have the memoirs of the Knight of Malta, General Reinhard Galen. Galen was instead of being persecuted at Nuremberg, Galen he came to work for the CIA. He writes about in his book how he was taken on Walter Battlesmith, the devout Catholic head of the CIA's private plane, for instance. Reinhard Galen became a CIA agent, and with the CIA actually became the head of West Germany's intelligence, and they created a West German intelligence service modeled off the Catholic CIA. And that while Galen was doing this, you had the Chancellor of West Germany, Konrad Adenauer, was a devout papist. Knight of Malta, Knight of the Order of the Golden Spur, Supreme Order of Christ, went to Catholic Mass. Adenauer did every single day as Chancellor. So this is a good article you should find here. Castro confesses the Jesuit ethics. And just quickly, I thought it was interesting. And I have this book here called The Service by Reinhard Galen. This was his memoirs that came out in what year did this come out? This was 1974, 1972. But just it's interesting because he's talking a bit about the revolution that took place in Cuba and why the United States didn't intervene to keep Batista in power. And it shows that the United States were on board with the Jesuit plan to create like a communist experiment in Cuba. And just like how the Soviet Union, how they had like this containment policy of keeping communism in one country, they wanted to do that in Latin America. Essentially, they had this like isolated little Soviet Union in Latin America, where Cuba was a communist country surrounded by USA puppet Latin American governments. But it shows that like, the United States was on board with and that's why supposedly Fidel Castro was supposedly there was like 600 assassination attempts against Castro, but that's all like to mask the reality that Castro was a Jesuit plant in Cuba. Castro's father was a member, was a high up executive at the United Fruit Company, which had numerous connections to the CIA. Alan Dulles was on the board of directors at United Fruit. John J. McCloy was a director at United Fruit. Walter Bedell Smith was a director at United Fruit. Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. had stock in United Fruit, for instance. John Foster Dulles had stock in United Fruit. So the fact that Castro's dad was a United Fruit employee shows that he was a plant, like just on that alone. But this is from page 237 from Reinhard Galen. I remember telling my colleagues that it was incomprehensible to me why the United States fumbled this unique chance of interfering militarily to eliminate Castro. That was Galen saying that. But just quickly, like, and if you know too, like the United States actually had like a strategic interest to stop Castro because Cuba at that point was literally like an American banana farm. Like Batista was a complete American puppet. Like the American corporations owned literally all of the wealth of Cuba. Like for instance, Irene DuPont had like the biggest estate in Cuba before the revolution, for instance. So like the United States, did have like a strategic interest to eliminate Castro, and they could have easily eliminated Castro. I think Castro was like a guerrilla. Are you kidding me? Going up against the United States military. Like if the U.S. wanted to, they could have wiped Castro off the map. And they had that pathetic Bay of Pigs, which was interestingly led by Manuel R. Time, who is Jesuit trained. They had a Jesuit trained Cuban dissenter leading the Bay of Pigs, like showing like so like that and again that was to keep Castro in power also. But so this is Galen here. I remember telling my colleagues, this is page 237. I remember telling my colleagues that it was incomprehensible to me why the United States fumbled this unique chance of intervening militarily to eliminate Castro. My opinion was founded on our in-depth analysis of the future role Castro might be expected to play on the international scene. Oddly enough, I suspect that the Americans were themselves largely to blame for Castro's overthrow of the dictator Batista, a leader who was certainly not as black as the international press depicted him at the time. It is clear that the Americans did nothing to aid Batista, while in Castro, who is known to have had a devout Jesuit schooling, I repeat, this is Reinhard Galen, while in Castro, who is known to have had a devout Jesuit schooling, they believed that they would see a leader emerge who would restore democracy, end quote. That's Galen admitting there that Castro's Jesuit schooling is why the United States didn't support Batista. And Batista, like, ultimately, like, he went in exile to Catholic Franco's dictatorship in Salazar's Portugal, another Catholic fascist dictator. So Batista didn't have it that hard, but like it just showed that the U.S. like was willing to sacrifice their commercial interests in Cuba for the Jesuits to create their communist experiment in Cuba. And that's the communist experiment is what's going on in China, and this is the communist experiment. It's this photo, like this title page is very like powerful. It's like a picture speaks a million words type of thing. This is showing you how the Jesuits are going to build their totalitarian technocratic society. And Sir Francis Bacon himself, I've seen papers, like he was one of the first like technocratic philosophers himself. So it was very significant, that he wrote this, or he drew this title page with the IHS on the title. There was one more thing I wanted to show you here. Oh, I found here this these Yeah, I'm gonna show you the Chinese diplomatic relations here. This guy was the ambassador from 2008 to 2015, Larry Wang. We see him. He's wearing his Order of the Pius IX medallion right here. And the China and the Vatican have had long relations. I showed you Li Lindsay was a Jesuit-trained advisor to Chiang Kai-shek in the for 20 years from 1930 to 1950. But the first Vatican apostolic delegate to China was all the way back in 1922. Celso Benigno Luigi Constantini. Mario Zanin was then the apostolic delegate in 1934. So I linked this in the description. You should go through these names. But recently there was an American who is the Vatican apostolic delegate to China, Paul Fitzpatrick Russell. Russell was ordained to the priesthood by the shamed pedophile Archbishop of Boston, Bernard Law. Would you look at that? He was named Apostolic Nuncio to China in 2008. And the Jesuit Pope Francis has since named him Apostolic Nuncio to Turkey and Turkmenistan. The Vatican has legal diplomatic relations with 180 countries, if you're not aware of it. There's really 180. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to show you here. Where was this? Okay, I'll pull this up here. There's a statue and information for this, I put this on my archive page, but this book is out there. You just type in Theodore Greisinger, History of the Jesuits, PDF, and there's lots of information on Matteo Ricci. Matteo Ricci was the first Jesuit to deeply penetrate China. He infiltrated the Chinese government back in the 1600s, and it was through Matteo Ricci that the Jesuits made their headway into China. But this statue was built in 2010 in Macau, China. Look at this right here. This is a statue of Father Matteo Ricci. This was built recently. This is so that the Chinese government is building statues using Chinese taxpayer dollars to build statues of Jesuit priests. That should tell you something. This is a message. And I linked this video in the description. There's lots of other videos. I saw The Economist even did a good video showing China's facial recognition system. But watch this documentary exposing China's digital dystopian dictatorship. You see, the Vatican is completely endorsing this type of society. This serfdom. It's a new dark age. That's as Willow Gromov would say. That's all I can. That's the best way I could describe it. This statue of the Jesuit Matteo Ricci was built in 2010 in China. That should say something. And actually, there's and if you watch the last documentary I did on the assassination of, or the documentary I put up on my channel, the assassination of Russia, which is essentially literally Russia's 9/11 event, literally identical to 9/11. It was the false flag. Putin then used the false flag of the apartment bombings to launch the war in Chechnya, just like the U.S. used the 9/11 false flag narrative to launch the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But coincidentally, in 2002, a year after 9/11, 3 years after the Russian apartment bombings incident, there was a joint NATO-Russia summit in Rome, of all places. And this summit was to get to this. This was when Russia and NATO joined together to fight the quote unquote war on terrorism together, which in reality was the Jesuits creating a concocted fake enemy, the war on terror, or a manufactured enemy that they created themselves through their own intelligence agencies. And it's just hilarious that of all places where they said Russia and NATO dedicated together that we will build a worldwide national security state. They didn't announce this in Rome, of all places. And I have I linked this in I linked a lot of links under the box in the video description of the documentary Assassination in Russia, but you can find this document from the NATO-Russia Council Rome Summit 2002. And Putin's government is very close to the Vatican, just like the current Chinese government. And yeah, I think that's all for this one, YouTube. I got to get going. I have to go to work soon. But thanks for tuning in, and peace and love. Namaste.